All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and man, let me tell you something. This video is gonna get rowdy. I'm letting y'all know right now, shit's about to pop off. Okay, so, well, first things first, if you didn't watch the last video, time out. If you didn't watch the last video, pause this video, go back and watch the last video, and then come back and finish this video. So in the last video that we did, right, Namor the Submariner had basically killed the king of the newly discovered Atlantean territory. Now, we are gonna learn more about these guys, right? So you're not gonna have to worry about feeling left out or anything like that. Just make sure you go back and watch the last video. So the thing about this is that in this whole event, right, after he killed the king, these old Atlanteans basically turn on Namor and all of his forces. And Susan Storm is trying to figure out why, right? She's like, why in the world would Namor the Submariner do this, right? Like, basically kill the king of a newly discovered tribe in their own kingdom, surrounded by their own forces. And that's when she realized Namor had planned all of this. Now, here's the thing, man. Namor the Submariner in the MCU, he's cool. And honestly, I never cared about Namor the Submariner until we got to the MCU. I take that back. There were only 2 times I ever liked Namor the Submariner. One was during this story in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, and the other one was in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, the New Avengers. Oh my God, I love that story. But it was during that story, right? That's where Namor is at his most badass. That and probably Avengers versus X-Men 2, those 3 stories. But like, this is one of those times when he's amazing. So Susan Storm figured out what was going on, that Namor killing the king was not just done arbitrarily. As a king himself, he realizes that if there is no king to give orders, that things will lead to a state of panic. So while Namor had killed the king, what he had also instructed was for his forces from Atlantis to attack this new kingdom. So literally, Namor kills the king, the army comes rolling in, and pops off. They start killing everybody. Now, it doesn't last long. And the reason why is because once Susan Storm realizes what happens, she pops out a force field and basically keeps like the entire kingdom protected. Now, here's one of the things that I want you to keep this in the back of your head. It's not going to become important now, but Susan Storm's force field is going to become like the thing that separates what is in effect every superhero on Earth from imminent doom, right? Like just destruction, death, chaos, pandemonium. She's gonna be like the sole line of defense until the reinforcements come. And son, man, let me tell you something, man. When those reinforcements come, man, dude, I can't wait till we get to that part of the story. Man, it's so ridiculously good. So Susan Storm basically keeps the whole place protected. I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. But it is an exciting story. It is an exciting story, and I'm so amped up about this. So Susan Storm keeps everything protected, right? Keeps these guys safe. But what ends up going on is she actually just holds this force field for like a day. Now, over the years in Marvel Comics, in all seriousness here, over the years in Marvel Comics, Susan Storm's force field has become more and more powerful as time has gone on, in the sense that when she was Malice, right, so she was just like a crazy woman, that her powers were kind of amplified. And a lot of the ability of her to maintain a force field for prolonged amounts of time and to maintain a huge force field for a lengthy period of time, that kind of thing maintained. And so what Jonathan Hickman is doing is basically building on a lot of the Susan Storm storytelling that's been done in the Fantastic Four comics over the years, Mark Miller, John Byrne, those guys, and just kind of bringing it all together here in this story. So again, it's one of those things, I'm really hoping they do her justice in the MCU, because I'm gonna tell you right now, man, people underestimate how powerful Susan Storm is. And so she's one of those characters that's cool. But because of the fact that Namor is currently being held prisoner because his armies cannot penetrate the shield of Susan Storm, Susan's response is, bring him to me. Now, one of the reasons why Susan does this is because, as we know, Namor the Submariner, man, he's got it down bad for Susan Storm, man. Like, he's down bad for Susan Storm. This guy, man, he's just holding out, he's just holding against hope that she gets tired of Reed Richards and she ends up banging him instead, which is actually what happened in the Ultimate Universe. It was pretty amazing. But the thing about this is that ultimately Namor spills the beans to Susan and he tells her, what's going on here is not what you think it is. In the days of Old Atlantis, right, eons and eons ago, even before Namor the Submariner was even born, right, like after Atlantis had basically fallen during the Great Cataclysm, when it had been destroyed by the Celestials, hence another reason why you should pause this video, go back and watch the last video, and then come back and continue this video. So during that point in time, that what had happened is that these old Atlanteans had arisen as what were in effect a scourge of the ocean, right? That what they couldn't take or conquer, they would consume, right? They were literally like a parasite, right? Just like a virus traveling around the ocean and just consuming everything in its path. And so war broke out between basically Namor's version of the Atlanteans and and these old Atlanteans. Now, initially, they were believed to have been destroyed and eradicated, and that was it. And all knowledge of their existence was stricken from the record books. But as we know now, some of them survived down in the Antarctic and under Vostok Lake, right, where Vostok Station is basically being built or operating or whatever. But the thing about this is that what Namor says is like the way these guys work is they're discovered or whatever it is, but they show up on the scene and then they present themselves as people who are trying to do cool things, right? They're on a mission of peace or something along those lines. And they have a person who stands in as their emissary from a particular kingdom, right? So in this instance, it is the Kingdom of Earth, which Susan Storm is like the emissary for the Kingdom of Earth. And then you have these old Atlanteans and you have the new Atlanteans. The way they work is they have the emissary, in this instance, Susan Storm, basically create a kind of, I guess, a meeting place whereby this group meets with this other kingdom, with Namor's people. The way it's supposed to go down, according to these old Atlanteans, the way they do things is Susan Storm will serve as a vector, everybody will let their guard down, then they attack. And like they basically catch everybody off guard, they kill Namor, they kill all the Atlanteans, so on and so forth. They're the only ones left, and then they sacrifice Susan Storm. They kill her. And then it would allow them basically dominion over the ocean. Namor, knowing their history and knowing what they're about, immediately attacked them, and that's why he did what he did. Now, the kicker to all this is that Susan Storm asked the question, well, how do you know they haven't changed? It's been hundreds of thousands of years. What makes you think they're the same? And so what ends up going on here is that Susan goes to meet with the old Atlanteans, spills the beans, and asks the question, is what Namor told me true? Their response is, no, it's not. We're not the same people that we used to be. Things are different now. And because Namor had killed the king, what they say is, we're too young to rule, which means you, Susan Storm, are now the steward of this old Atlantean kingdom. You rule until we're old enough to take the throne ourselves, which means now they're under the protection of Susan Storm. Once that happens, Namor's like, no, they have to go. Susan Storm overpowers Namor and then says, no, these people are under my protection. I'm going home. If any harm comes to them, we will eradicate New Atlantis. Like, we'll destroy you, Namor, and your kingdom. Have no illusions, son. Do not be confused about your place in the bigger picture. We will kill you, Namor. We will destroy you. And if you don't think that I have the ability to, I promise you I can, right? I'll open a force field in your brain that'll shut off oxygen to it, and that'll be the story of you. The guy who was stupid enough to believe that he could kill Susan Storm. So here's the thing, right? It's the coolest thing. So at this point, we switch over to Galactus, right? We switch over to Galactus. Now, again, in the last video, what we had was Galactus, basically the body of his future self, being discovered by the Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer went and told Galactus and then brought Galactus to Earth. And so what this did is it led to Reed Richards spilling the beans and saying, in the future, basically the sun ends up essentially going out, right? Or at least, you know, it doesn't let off as much heat as it used to, like something was artificially draining the energy from that sun. When that happened, essentially the Earth's superheroes captured you, Galactus, and they used your body as a time machine and wanted to bring their people back to the past. You died in the process, but they set up residence on New Earth, which orbits out there in a black hole or near a black hole somewhere. And so ultimately Galactus grabbed Reed Richards and then they're on their way to New Earth. But again, one of the things we talked about in the last video is that Galactus wanted to get the hell out of Earth as fast as humanly possible, because what he didn't want to do was risk a conflict with Franklin Richards, because that's what he tells Reed, your son's powers are back, Reed, and it scares the shit out of me. So like I got out of Earth as fast as I can. A little kid with the power to alter reality. And here's the thing to understand, this fear isn't coming out of nowhere, right? Those are the guys who are familiar with the history between Franklin Richards and Galactus. I mean, during the old Abraxas saga, right, when Galactus died and Abraxas, the multiversal representation of destruction, basically, he was a cosmic entity that Marvel got rid of super fast. But when he emerged, Franklin Richards resurrected Galactus from the dead, right? And then they used the ultimate nullifier to destroy Abraxas. Franklin's ridiculously powerful, and he's a little kid that can't fully control his powers. So essentially what could happen is Galactus could spark a fight with Franklin Richards, and Franklin could use his powers to turn Galactus into a giant bowl of jello, and there's nothing Galactus could do about it. That's how powerful Franklin Richards is, man. That kid is broken. That's why Galactus bailed as fast as he could. But once they end up arriving at New Earth, Galactus asks the all-encompassing question, right? If the people in the future on Earth use my body as a time machine to come back to the past in order to keep themselves alive because the sun is failing, is there a way for you to stop that, Reed? Is there a way for you to keep your sun operating so that they don't need to kill me in the future to come back to the past? Otherwise, this will just be a cycle, right? Literally, my days are numbered. numbered. Like, I can count how many days I have left until I ultimately die. Is there a way to keep that from happening? Now, Reed harkens back to his time with the Council of Reeds, which is why I told you guys, everything that Jonathan Hickman does is important. Everything he writes is important. It all comes back in some form or fashion. Remember, in that initial story, that first story arc that we covered, Reed learned to perform surgery on a son. And that's what he harkens back to and says, yes, I think I can keep our son protected. I think I can find a way to ensure it doesn't die out and that the citizens on Earth don't need to use your body as a time machine. And so ultimately, Galactus says, okay, fine, then you do what you need to, Reed, but so will I, right? And he's just like, I hunger. So literally, Galactus is going to destroy New Earth. Now, when that happens, one of the things to know is that Ted Castle, along with Alyssa Moy, the ones who basically built New Earth in the process, and Alyssa Moy betraying Ted Castle and using it as a way to bring all these people from the future here, that they're just kind of like, no, this can't be done. But one of the other things to know that would have kind of gone on here behind the scenes is that the Alyssa Moy that we see here now is not the original human Alyssa Moy, right? That was the thing that we covered, is that when Ted Castle and Alyssa Moy were building New Earth, they were building it as what was in effect like a safe haven, right? If something happened to Earth and it became uninhabitable or uninhabitable, the citizens of Earth could basically take up on New Earth. But what ended up going on is that it was revealed that Ted Castle was actually using it for the super rich, right? The ultra rich would be able to exist on New Earth and everybody else would just be left to die on Earth, and that would basically be it. Alyssa Moy turned against him, but Alyssa Moy was killed. And so what ended up going on here is that Ted Castle had actually built a new version of Alyssa Moy, right? Like a cyborg computerized version. Not only that, what also goes on here, and at least what Reed learns that wasn't readily made available to us, is that the original Alyssa Moy is kind of alive, but not really, but she's more of in kind of a catatonic state. That quite literally, all the people who are walking around New Earth right now, they're not really human beings in the traditional sense, that they're more or less just kind of automatons, right? Robots. But the consciousness, the mental backups of those human beings had basically been stored in the head of the actual Alyssa Moy, which physically seems to be the case too, which is why her head is just so gigantic. But they ultimately have to teleport her away, right? Because what Ted Castle realized is the human brain can store far more information than a computer can. Not only that, the human brain is actually more conducive to basically storing human thoughts and concepts than like a hard drive or anything along those lines. Plus, it would draw a lot of attention if this guy was building like this giant machine that was going to essentially house everybody here. He could do this with Alyssa Moy in secret, and nobody on Earth would truly know what was going on. But once Reed learns the realization, he's like, okay, something's not right here, right? Like something's not right about what's going on, not just with Alyssa Moy, but with Galactus. And what you end up having is basically Lightwave, who again is from the future and was at one point a herald of Galactus, who says like, my former master's conversation rate is much higher than normal. Galactus is not trying to consume the world, Reed. It's why he hasn't constructed his world consuming machine, because that's what Galactus always does. He shows up on a world, he basically builds his machine to consume everything on Earth or consume the source of the Earth's energy, or at least the planet's energy, and then of course the planet's destroyed in the process. Lightwave is like, you'll notice he's not doing that, Reed. The reality here is that Galactus does not wish to consume New Earth. Galactus wants to destroy it. Like he wants to eradicate it, because we built this as an arc to get us here. And the reality is we killed Galactus in the process. Reed, this is nothing more than petty vengeance. That's really all it is. Galactus is pissed off that we killed him in the future in order to get here. So he's going to destroy this place now. And that's basically going to be it. It's the closest he can get to revenge. And so again, while that goes on, right, while they're basically trying to evacuate New World, what we do, ladies and gentlemen, we switch over to the Baxter Building. We switch over to the Baxter Building and what is arguably one of the greatest moments in Fantastic Four history. I told you, ladies and gentlemen, the ending of this video was gonna be lit, and I guarantee I'm gonna lose my voice by the time this video is done. Okay, so one of the things that we had talked about before is that on Earth, you had what was called the cult of the negative zone. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with Marvel Comics, the negative zone is a place that exists out in the multiverse, but there's only one negative zone across the whole multiverse, and it literally exists as a hallway of doors. So you could show up from like people from the main Marvel universe could show up in the negative zone and meet people from an alternate reality. And in fact, that's happened before, right? That's happened happened in Marvel Comics before. And so one of the things that went on here is that in the negative zone, you have a nihilist. He's basically a guy who just believes life is meaningless and all that kind of stuff. So essentially anybody on Reddit, right, is basically kind of how he's like the most steadfast definition of a Redditor, right? He's just a nihilist. And so what this does, or at least what it did do in Marvel Comics, is it led to him invading the main Marvel universe and basically eradicating almost all life, right? Like, it's nuts. Annihilation, the story arc where that happened, it literally opened up with like Peter Quill Star-Lord and Richard Rider Nova and the citizens of the universe just fleeing for their fucking lives. That's literally all it was, right? Just them just trying to live. That's how the story opens, right? Like, they're already losing. It's God, it was a phenomenal story. Fortunately, we covered it, which you're welcome to check out after the end of this video. But the thing about it is that once he was defeated and confined back to the negative zone, this led to the cult of the negative zone basically being members of the negative zone itself, right? So like Annihilust's forces masquerading as human beings and trying to find a way into the Baxter Building. And the reason why is because in the Baxter Building is the only known portal in the universe where you can access the negative zone. And it's been that way ever since the old school stories of the Fantastic Four. They've always had the portal there, right? You can always go in and out of the negative zone if you choose to. And so the cult of the negative zone was literally trying to get in. Well, they finally have. Now, once they get into the Baxter Building, keep in mind, there's only a handful of people here. Reed Richards is in space, right? You got Susan Storm down in the ocean dealing with everything with Namor and Old Atlantis. So what you have is Johnny Storm, you have Ben Grimm, you've got Franklin, Valeria, and the Future Foundation, right? These young kids. And while these kids are highly intelligent, they all have different powers and so on, they haven't been truly trained in how to use their abilities. Neither has Franklin even, right? Franklin's not the most capable person to use his powers. That's changing. And in fact, it's changing right now. We just haven't covered it yet. Something I want you guys to be aware of, and actually we're going to cover this once we get done with the 3 story arc. We're going to jump into a comic book line that was written by Hickman that also joined the Fantastic Four. It was called Future Foundation. It's literally Franklin learning how to use his powers, and it's awesome, right? Like, he creates like whole universes and shit. It's some of the coolest things that you're ever gonna see, right? It's the coolest stuff. But what ends up going on is that Franklin, again, not fully tutored in how to use his abilities. He uses them where they can, when he can, but there isn't a whole lot doing there, right? Also remember, Ben Grimm basically lost his thing form, right? He's back in his human form, so there's only so much he can do. Now, eventually his form starts to return, right? He starts to turn back into his rocky self. But the thing about this is the cult is invading at a fever pitch, and it's literally all they can do to hold off, right? To hold off these forces. Because remember, the forces of the negative zone, right? The forces of Annihilus, they conquered Galactus, the Silver Surfer. I mean, pretty much everybody fell before them. So they're only able to do so much. The problem with this is that while these forces, while you have like Johnny Storm and Franklin and Ben and all those guys facing off against these guys, the other half of the force goes to the negative zone portal. And when they do, they blow it open, right? They literally open the negative zone portal, which allows the forces of Annihilus to start making their way there and to start pouring in. Now, you do get this really cool moment where like Franklin just sort of amps up his powers and then incinerates a huge chunk of these Annihilation Wave forces, but there's only so much that he can do, right? Because again, he's not fully trained, so he is able to hold them at bay. So the decision is made by Johnny and Ben and Valeria in them to actually enter through the negative zone portal and to take out the forces of Annihilus as best they can before they can even get to the portal in the first place, right? So fighting on their territory. Now, once they get in there, you do see some cool stuff, right? I mean, like, there's literally this moment where you have like Johnny Storm just like blasting fire in one direction, Franklin's just like putting off huge amounts of energy in another, but then you've got like Ben Grimm firing off this just insane gun. But one of the things to remember is that the forces of Annihilus number in the trillions, right? Technically in the billions, right? It's a huge, overwhelming force. It's just not done by conceivable standards. And so while these guys, the Future Foundation, are able to hold them off momentarily, what this does is it gives them a kind of reprieve, but then they suddenly look out to the horizon and they realize there's a whole host coming, right? Billions of guys coming, right? Just billions of forces coming, way more than they can hold off. And so what they end up realizing is that the negative zone, right? Annihilus's forces had shut down the portal on their side. All they needed was somebody to shut down the portal on the Baxter Building side. But in in order to keep the forces away, right, in order to shut them down, someone's got to stay in the negative zone. Someone has to stay there while everybody else gets back to the Baxter Building, shut down the portal, and then they'll shut down the portal from the Baxter side. And this is one of the coolest things, man. This is one of the coolest things in Marvel Comics. All right, just check this out, man. All right, so here's the thing. You guys remember the story, the thing that we did earlier, where we did a couple videos ago, where Reed was yelling at Johnny Storm, right? See, this is why I love doing videos in the parts, man, because it all comes back, right? So you remember when Reed was talking to Johnny, where Johnny was being reckless and so on, and he said, at some point, Johnny Storm, you're gonna have to figure out where you stand, right? When that girl, who was a member of the negative zone, had gotten into the Baxter Building and then temporarily opened the portal, and then Reed started screaming at Johnny, like, you could have let the whole force of Annihilus onto Earth, and it would have eradicated the whole planet, Johnny. Like, you can't be reckless. You're gonna have to pick a place. You're gonna have to stand for something. You can't keep this devil-may-care attitude all the time. And so this is when it comes back, because ultimately, Johnny Storm decides to stay, right? Johnny Storm decides to stay behind, and it's the last stand of Johnny Storm. This guy goes out like a fucking hero, and it's like one of the greatest things ever, right? So check this out. So literally, Johnny stays behind, and they're just kind of like, no, like, we can find another way, right? We can find another way, Johnny. You don't have to stay. And Johnny's only real response here is, when you get back, and when you see Reed and you see Susan, tell Reed Richards, this is where I chose to make my stand. This is where I chose to stand for something. I'm staying here. You guys need to leave, right? So they ultimately end up going back through the portal, right? Like, they go back through the portal, and literally Johnny Storm stays there. So they create the barrier, right? They establish the barrier that the negative zone can't get through. And Johnny Storm starts activating the portal, right? The door starts to close. The door starts closing from the other side. So it's just Johnny there by himself. And they're literally watching Johnny Storm as like an army of like a billion forces of Annihilus come making their way over there, right? Ben Grimm's like beating on the door, right? He's like, Johnny, no! Johnny, no! It's like just this ridiculously emotional moment, right? And Johnny's like, you know, you don't wish it any more than I do, Ben Grimm. But the reality here is, like, this is how things have to be. So these forces are making their way, right? These forces of Annihilus are making their way. Johnny Storm, in the most epic moment ever, right? Turns around and he's just like, 1,000,000,000, huh? 1,000,000,000. You think I'm afraid of that? You think I'm afraid of that? Flame on! With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Massive cliffhanger. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.